including the law enforcement officers.
So clearly it was wrong to label them domestic terrorists, right?
Again, I'm not at the department. I don't know what the information she had. If you're asking me my opinion, I would have waited till the investigation play out before I rendered any decision.
So you think it's still an open question as to whether or not they're domestic terrorists?
Wait a second. Did you catch that? A top government witness just refused, flat out refused, to say whether these individuals were domestic terrorists. And then Senator Chris Van Hollen explodes, calling it outrageous right to his face. This is the moment the entire hearing goes off the rails, and what it reveals should concern every American. Before we break it down, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We bring you the real story behind the headlines every single day.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman.
Hollen, I apologize.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wolf, if I could start with you. You would agree that in America, people have the right to peacefully protest under the First Amendment, right?
Correct.
You would agree that people have the constitutional right to due process, right?
Correct.
Would you agree with Kristi Noem, who characterized Renee Good as a domestic terrorist? Is Renee Good a domestic terrorist in your view?
I've been very clear on this point when that incident occurred, as well as the Preddy incident as well, is to let that investigation play out before any comments are made about the motives of any of the individuals involved, including the law enforcement officers.
So clearly it was wrong to label them domestic terrorists, right?
Again, I'm not at the department. I don't know what the information she had. If you're asking me my opinion, I would have waited till the investigation play out before I rendered any decision.
So you think it's still an open question as to whether or not they're domestic terrorists?
Again, I'm going to let the investigation
It sounds like
play
you
out.
do, which I think, the country has seen the videos, okay? So I find it outrageous that you would sit here today and hold open the idea that they were domestic terrorists. Their parents and their loved ones deserve an apology from the U.S. government, and I found it outrageous that you're taking the position that you are
I'm
here
not taking
today.
that position.
Yes, you are. By taking no position and leaving on the table the notion that they're domestic terrorists, you are taking a position. Mr. Beer, thank you for emphasizing the big lie, that what the Trump administration is doing is going after the worst of the worst. As Senator Merkley pointed out, and as you've shown, that's just not true. I mean, nobody wants people who are here illegally committing violent crimes. But the overwhelming majority of people who are in detention right now, by ICE's own admission, pose no risk to public safety. Is that right?
That's right. Over 70% were given no threat level at all. They could be released right now without a threat to the public.
Yeah. So this is just such a big lie. I mean, that's what we're seeing playing out in this forum and out of the White House from people like Stephen Miller and the President of the United States.
What you're watching here is a Senate hearing that quickly turns into a heated clash over truth, accountability, and political narratives. It starts simple enough. Senator Van Hollen asks a straightforward question: do Americans have the right to peacefully protest and receive due process? Of course, the answer is yes. That's the foundation of the Constitution. But then comes the real question. He presses former DHS official Chad Wolf on whether individuals like Renee Good should be labeled domestic terrorists. And here's where things take a turn. Wolf refuses to give a direct answer. Instead, he says the investigation should play out before any conclusions are made. That's a cautious, by-the-book response, one you'd expect from someone who understands how serious that label is. But Van Hollen doesn't accept that, not even close. He doubles down, accusing Wolf of leaving the door open to branding these individuals as domestic terrorists. He calls it outrageous. He demands clarity, and this is where you really have to pay attention. Because what's happening here isn't just a disagreement, it's a fundamental divide in how labels, power, and due process are being used in today's political climate. From a common-sense perspective, labeling someone a domestic terrorist is one of the most serious accusations the government can make. That's not something you throw around lightly. That requires evidence, investigation, and due process, exactly what Wolf was pointing to. But the pressure to assign that label quickly, that tells you something else is going on. Then the hearing shifts to immigration, and again, the narrative gets challenged. Policy analyst David Beer drops a statistic that completely cuts against the mainstream talking point. He says over 70% of detained immigrants have no assigned threat level. That means the majority are not considered dangerous to public safety. Think about that for a second. We're constantly told enforcement is focused on the worst of the worst, but according to the data presented here, that's not the full picture. And then comes another major claim, one that really shifts the conversation.
States. Could you talk about another big lie? We do know that the so-called big beautiful bill, as Republicans called it, increased the debt massively, like over $4 trillion, right? They gave tax cuts to billionaires permanently. They cut health programs. They cut food safety, food programs. They had a walloping increase for ICE, like 7 times its regular budget. And at the same time, we hear people like Stevie Miller and others claiming that it's actually immigrants who are the cause of increasing our deficits and debt. In fact, they've said that immigration is the cause of the growing national debt, and immigrants take more from the country than they contribute. Now, Mr. Beer, you've looked at this question very closely. Could you just respond to what I think is the second big lie?
Yeah, over the last 30 years, we looked at all the government budgets, federal, state, and local combined. Immigrants reduced deficits by $14.5 trillion, which is about a third of all of the total deficits during that period of time. And it's easy to understand why, because they work at 12 percentage points higher than the national average. They use less benefits because they're subject to constraints, unique barriers to applying for those benefits, in particular Social Security and Medicare, where those are by far our largest programs, and they're not eligible for those at all if they're here in the country illegally, or if they came legally and they don't have a sufficient work history to qualify. So you have clear reasons for believing that they are reducing the deficits and debt. They are a benefit to this country, and we need more people who are going to contribute in the future as our population ages.
Could you amplify a little more on the issue of Medicare and Social Security? Because those, trust funds in just a couple years, there won't, be enough to pay out full on the dollar for Social Security and Medicare.
That's
As
right.
you pointed out, there are many immigrants that are paying in to that, but not paying out. So could you just elaborate on that?
According to the Social Security Administration, we need about 35 million more workers in order to keep revenues equal to expenses by the middle of the 2030s. So we are at a position right now where immigration is not going to solve it. Obviously, it's not going to solve it, but it is moving us in the right direction. These are people who are showing up. They're ready to work. They're often prime age individuals who are ready to enter the labor force. So it's a huge benefit fiscally to the United States to have these people who want to contribute to our country.
Thank you. And thank you for exposing 2 of the big lies coming out of the Trump administration.
Thank you.
Beer argues that immigrants have actually reduced U.S. deficits by trillions of dollars over the past few decades. He explains that they work at higher rates and often contribute to systems like Social Security without receiving the same level of benefits. Now, whether you agree with that conclusion or not, here's the key takeaway. The debate isn't as simple as politicians make it sound. What you're seeing in this hearing is a collision between political messaging and complex reality. On one side, you have strong claims, emotional language, and urgency. On the other, you have calls for patience, investigation, and data-driven conclusions. As a viewer, you should always be asking, where's the evidence? Who benefits from the narrative? And are we protecting the principles this country was built on, like due process and fairness? Because once labels like domestic terrorist are used loosely, it doesn't just affect one case, it sets a precedent. And that's something every American, regardless of political party, should take seriously. This is exactly why these hearings matter. Not just for what's said, but for what's revealed between the lines. If you want more breakdowns like this, real analysis, no spin, and the moments they hope you miss, make sure you subscribe to the Capital Current and turn on notifications. And don't go anywhere. Check out the next video on your screen right now, because the story doesn't stop here. There's a lot more you need to see.